You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Lian Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their primal power and actualize their deepest gifts. Something that I'm noticing I'm seeing more and more deeply by the day lately is the role our bodies play in our experience of life here on this planet. I'll explain a bit more about this. I believe for some time that the amount of pain, shame, numbness, disassociation, and a restriction a woman has in her body directly but inversely correlates with how much of her power, her radiance, her sensitivity, her pleasure, her wisdom, her depth, her creativity, her desire, her voice, her love, and her gifts that she has access to. So, if you're a woman, our newest offering, Unraveling the Body, could be perfect for you. It's a crucible of wild awakening for women in which we'll unravel the mysteries, freedom, and gifts of your body. It's also the, I think, most affordable offering that I've done live for, if not ever, certainly many, many years. And I don't even know if I'm going to do something like this again. So if you've been waiting for the opportunity to work with me in some way or other, this could be one worth checking out. So if you're feeling your body calling for that unraveling, do go check out all the juicy details now. And they're at primalhappiness.co/unravel. And as I mentioned on the last episode, Elizabeth Lovius and I ran a webinar for leaders on the topic of adaptive heart-led leadership. And oh my stars, it went so beautifully. And the really interesting thing was the way it naturally transmuted from a webinar into a powerful circle of leaders. That gave us both a potent taste of what's possible and made us even more clear that our planned upcoming creation is exactly what leaders need and want right now. So Elizabeth and I are offering a brand new Sacred Leadership Circle, supporting you with your real life challenges right now as a leader. We will coach, mentor, and support you to become a clear, calm, and creative heart-led leader, to have a compelling vision of what you want to create for this time, and to adapt with ease to changing circumstances and take aligned, inspired action. It is going to be something incredibly unique and unbelievably powerful. I can already feel it. So go register your interest to be the first to know when it opens for enrollment. And that's at leadershipwisdom.info/circle. Really hoping to see you in that circle soon. And now for this week's show. This episode is our monthly show called All the Everything, and it's where I jam on an eclectic mix of topics. This is where you can get up close and personal with me, get inside my head, and hear what I'm up to and thinking about. So in this episode, I shared what I've been up to in the past month, then dive deep into the topic, how to move through fear and allow yourself to be seen. This was the winning topic in the poll in our Facebook group, and it's actually one of my favourite topics. So I'm really hoping it will hit the spot for you too. Also, just to say, like many other parents around the world right now, I am attempting to work around my children, which then unsettles the dogs. So I'm afraid you're going to hear me being interrupted by said children and dogs multiple times during this episode. It's quite embarrassing, but it's also a pretty realistic snapshot of my life right now. If you're trying to juggle something similar, hopefully it'll make you feel a bit better. It's really not just you. So let's jump in. Welcome to April's All the Everything. And this is my monthly show where I'm going to share with you what I've been up to and creating and consuming over the past month, so March. And then I'm going to go deep on the topic of something along the lines of, here we go, how to move through fear and allow yourself to be seen. And the thing about this topic is I'd actually done polls I usually do into the Primal Happiness Facebook group, asking the members to vote on which topic they'd like me to do for All the Everything. And oh my goodness, that felt like about 100 years ago. I genuinely thought when I was thinking, oh my gosh, what should I talk about on today's live? I thought, did I do a poll? And I went back and I had done a poll, and it felt so long ago because of everything that's happened since. I had no idea. And I looked, it was all it wasn't pre-coronavirus, but it was pre kind of the ensuing changes, rupture that's happened to our way of life. So it was the topic suggestions I'd had. Hang on, my dog's now whining. The topic suggestions that I gave that everyone voted on suddenly just seemed really irrelevant and shallow, maybe. And so then I had this kind of whole spin of what shall I talk about then? Because I feel like I've spoken about so many things to do with coronavirus, and not the coronavirus, but kind of where we find ourselves, how we can choose to create and be leaders in this time. So I was just like, I feel quite empty on that topic right now. And then I realized, you know what, the topic that had come up first in the poll, which was allowing yourself to be seen, has actually been more relevant to me personally than ever. And so I just thought, perhaps just trust that sense that people had towards that topic is still relevant. And maybe, like so many things I'm seeing right now, those places, that resistance, the shadows we have are actually now here to be seen and move through. Right now, this is an opportunity for us to do that, see those things and do that work more than ever. So I'm going to trust that topic that was selected then is still the right topic. We'll see. And is there anything else I want to say before I dive in? Oh, just also to say, for anyone that's here watching it live or on the replay on Facebook, I'm wearing quite a glitzy top for a Friday morning. It's it's covered in sequins, and I chose that especially for the whole kind of allowing myself to be seen. It feels a bit edgy. I mean, I love a sequin, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't normally wear them to work on a Friday morning. And I'm also doing it on my personal Facebook page because that's also edgier for me, I've realised. I normally do them on our business Facebook page, Primal Happiness page, lives, I mean. And I think because I know that people have chosen into being our audience there, that always feels like a safer container to allow myself to be seen. And so I was just like, no, I'm going to model everything that I'm talking about in this show. So I'm going to wear sequins and I'm going to do it on my personal Facebook page, even though both are slightly edgy for me. And don't worry, I will be sharing actually much edgier examples than that, but I just wanted to just explain those choices before I dive in. Okay, I think we're ready to start. So if you've watched or listened to this show before, you'll know that I share what I've been consuming, what I've been creating, and then the main topic. So we'll start with what I've been consuming. And I've actually been surprisingly, maybe, I don't know, reading less than ever. I usually read a ton, and I have been, but I think I've actually been creating so much. I've actually been reading less this last month. But the one thing that has probably stuck out more to me of everything that I've read lately is an essay by Charles Eisenstein that I shared into essay, article, whatever you want to call it. And I shared it into the Primal Happiness Facebook group. I will pop it into the comments afterwards. Don't go read it now. Go read it after this live. And it was by far the best thing I've seen shared about the coronavirus and the rupture to our way of life and the gift that can be for us, that we can choose into that being for us. And it kind of pulled together a lot of the things that I've been feeling and seeing and talking to some of my kind of fellow leaders, coaches about. It's a long article, but I would so recommend go reading it. It is just gorgeous, really hopeful and activating. So that's by far the thing that kind of stood out most to me of anything really I've consumed this month. It's only an article, but that shows the impact of it. As to what I've been creating, I'm going to, I think, change this up slightly this month in that two of the examples of what I've been creating are so relevant to the topic that we're looking at today around allowing ourselves to be seen. So I'll, rather than kind of trying to do a snapshot now and then deepening into it when we get into that the main juice, I'll save that. But one thing I can share with you, unfortunately, I'll try and take a photo. In fact, I took a photo the other day, but one thing I've created, well, I've had a hand in creating, let's say, is this badger skull. So if you're listening on the podcast, you won't be able to see it, but I'll share a photo that I shared on Instagram of it. So it's a beautiful badger skull. And this badger, I lived locally. We've got a set that's in a lane opposite our house. And this one, I don't know how he died. I think naturally. And just to say, we didn't kill him. We found him dead. And my husband saw him out on a dog walk, and I said, bring me back the skull. It was already a bit decomposed by this point. So he brought me back the skull. And I've spent the last, I don't know how many months, cleaning him, going through different cleaning processes to get to the point where he's now this just, I don't know, just representation of like power and sacred energy and a kind of reminder of the life cycle. So he's one of my office companions. I also have a squirrel skull that I found kind of pre-cleaned, as in nature had done the work and cleaning. So that's one of the things I've been creating, at least as a tangible thing I can show you. Okay, let's move into. I'm just going to check my notes, and then we'll dive in. So, allowing ourselves to be seen. And as I said earlier, this was a topic selected by our members in the Primal Happiness Facebook group. And then as I started considering, does this feel like it's still relevant? I recognized that it had actually been really relevant to me over the last month. And then the more I pondered it, the more I realized it was showing up in the collective, as things often do. A part of that's just because we see what we be, if that makes sense. And partly because, we're not these kind of islands. Usually something that we're feeling is mirrored in the collective in some way. And I noticed that people who I was used to relying on, really, of being voices, being seen, sharing their views, were either silent or quieter. They seemed a little bit reluctant to put their voice into the world right now. And having spoken to some of those, and I was the same, just to be clear, when we really got that sense of, wow, the coronavirus is having an impact, it's coming, and it's going to be, big changes for us. I spent at least a week, perhaps longer, before I said anything at all publicly about it. And I noticed that quite a lot of my friends were the same. So I think some of that was this sense of, I just want to, and I think I shared something on this. I can't even remember. Like I say, I've been producing so many things. I can't even remember where I said this, but it was almost like I wanted to go inwards and attune to what was there for me first before I started to consume too much about it out there or put my voice out there prematurely. And so I think that was very true for at least some of my friends that have been holding back. And even when I then felt ready to share, ready to be seen again, and the same for my friends, there was this kind of sense of, oh my goodness, like who am I to be seen and to speak on this topic? What do I have to offer people right now? And certainly, and I've seen quite a few people who are sort of talking about these things, and it's connected to their work in some way. They're a coach or trainer or author. There is this kind of sense of, what if me putting my voice out right now, allowing myself to be seen talking about anything actually, but if it has any link back to my business, is it going to be seen as like crass or kind of money grabbing or tone deaf? So it's very much been this resistance that many of us fear, this kind of fear. I mean, that's what resistance is, this fear to allow ourselves to be seen for who we are, to seen for our deepest gifts, is actually more present than ever. And I believe this is a time where we have an opportunity to be seen more deeply than ever, and that's more needed than ever. So as it happens, I think this is actually a perfect time to talk about this. And I'd love to hear if you've got had similar experience, similar thoughts, similar things that have been holding you back. I'd love to hear, because I've certainly been hearing this from my clients and from my friends, and I've kind of noticed people mention it outside of kind of my own circles. But I suspect it's not just in my circles. I think it is something that quite a few people are feeling right now. So let's just for a moment look at, when we're talking about being seen, what does that actually mean? And this isn't just to say, this isn't like the dictionary definition or like this is right. This is just my own sense of it. I believe that we all come here as a kind of, you could call it a unique way of being, unique essence, soul. We come here to be a gift to the world. And the only way really that the world can receive the gift that we are is if we allow ourselves to be experienced. So really you could use that word seen. Really, you could use the word experienced instead. For some reason, we've kind of collectively tend to use the word seen, but I think we're really talking about experience, because that seen could be manifested in so many different ways. It clearly isn't just via the medium of sight. So there is, I think, a deep, deep desire in human beings to be seen in that way, for their essence to be experienced, for their gift to be, again, given to the world, because we have I'd say often it's a subconscious sense of like, that's what we came here for. So if I don't do that, I'm kind of like not playing the game. I'm going to kind of, I'm going to get through life. I'm going to survive. But at the end of it, kind of like, was that really the sort of juiciest, most beautiful, most creative way I could have lived? Probably not. So I think we've got this underlying drive to be seen in that way for that reason. And then for some of us, there's going to be, as well as that, is it a greater need? Maybe a greater need, or maybe it's a more a specific way that manifests. So speaking personally, part of my unique essence is radiance. And if you're wondering what I haven't got time to go deep on what I mean by unique essence, but what I will do is I'll link to at least one show I did with my friend Adam Quiney that is about unique essence, how to discover your unique essence. And it's a way that Jonathan and I now also work with our clients, because it is so powerful. It's a way of, it's totally beyond like personality tests or anything like that. It really is a distillation of who we are and how people experience us. Any of my one-to-one clients will know this, and they all love it. And most of them say like, oh my goodness, is this something I can do with my clients? It is really that rich and just gorgeous. So part of my essence is radiance. And a way of talking about this would be people with radiance, and often for a man, the sort of similar equivalent word would be presence. It's a kind of innate desire stroke ability to be in the spotlight. There's a kind of almost a natural draw to be seen, to be experienced at a greater height or level than perhaps an average person. And so I tend to, and other people that share this quality have a kind of like it's a heightened version of kind of what everyone's experiencing. So it's one of those things where it can often look like I find this easy. When I say this, whether that be doing a Facebook Live, whether that be doing a podcast, whether that be sharing my heart on Facebook posts, whatever it might be, it can look like I find this stuff easy. And in a way, it's easy in that it feels like breathing to me. It feels like I'm doing what I came here to do. On the other hand, I have huge amounts of fear around it, huge amounts of resistance. And you could take literally anything that I do, any way that I create that allows myself to be seen, and there'll be a story behind it of how I finally got to the point of doing. I mean, for example, the podcast itself, I don't think I would have done it if I hadn't had Jonathan saying to me, this would be a really great way of getting kind of our message out there. In fact, to be honest, I think at the point where I started the podcast, it was actually just me. I don't think at that point, Jonathan and I had actually partnered. I think it was like a month or two before. But even so, just as him kind of seeing what was possible for me and supporting me, could see that would be a really good way for me to put my message out there, and would be something that I'd be good at and ultimately enjoy. But oh my goodness, I had a ton of resistance, absolutely a ton of resistance to that. And here we are, how many years later? I'll always mess this up if I try and estimate numbers on the fly. It's about 6 years, let's say. And now it just feels, really, really natural. And do I have any fear about doing the podcast? I don't think I have any. Very occasionally. Sorry, my dog's in a really whiny mood. Give me a moment. What is going on? No. My children, I mean, they're off. They've been off for weeks anyway because of the virus, but they're also off for the Easter holidays watching a programme, and I think he wants to be snuggled up in there with them. But if I let him snuggle up in there, then he'll want to then come back. So we'll just try and ignore him. So when it comes to the podcast, that's been a really great example of this curve that isn't personal to me. This is the curve that I think all of us go through, where we feel a pull towards something. Because I did as much, I wouldn't have done the podcast if it'd just been Jonathan saying, do the podcast, it'll be amazing. If I hadn't felt some pull to it, I clearly wouldn't have done it. There was something in me that just felt like, as much as this feels so uncomfortable, it does feel right. So we go through this kind of like, it feels awful. It feels really uncomfortable. It feels really scary and unsafe. And it feels like it's calling me. And then each time we take a step in that direction, we do another rep, the fear starts to diminish. And then we come out to the point where we are usually able to do it with little to no fear. And that's not to say we've cracked it for everything, by the way. I can give you a similar story for pretty much everything I do. That just happens to be the podcast. It is not... Right, I'm going to let that blasted dog out. Give me a second, sorry. Sorry. So I think as we transcend our fears, it's not even transcend really. It very much is a case of kind of moving through them and seeing what's there for us. But as we do them, that can have a halo effect to other ways to allow ourselves to be seen. But it's certainly in my experience and from the people I've coached, it doesn't have a kind of like, okay, now I've managed to move through my fear of being seen here. That means I can take on the world and I can do absolutely everything and I won't have any fear. Like, that just doesn't seem to be the case. Anytime we're stepping into greater possibility, we'll have a pretty much equal level of fear as an equivalent. So that's just how it works. So coming back to what I was just saying about the podcast. Yeah, so now I'm at the point where I have no fear about doing the podcast. I still have a little bit about doing Facebook Lives. Like I said, I'm doing this one. When I say this one, if you listen to the podcast, I can't remember if I've already mentioned this, but I do them as a Facebook Live. Oh my goodness, the dogs today. Sorry, I'm just going to leave the door open. The doing Facebook Lives now doesn't really bother me too much, but doing it on my personal Facebook page does more so. Oh my goodness, sorry, this is a nightmare. This is like life with dogs and children. This is going to be an interesting one to edit. So let me just like take a moment and somehow get back to my train of thought. Yeah, so the reason I'm doing this on my personal Facebook page is, for me, that does still hold some resistance. So again, I chose to do this almost as an example of how these kind of like pockets of resistance can still show up when something feels a bit familiar or a little bit more dangerous. Right, let me just have a look at my notes now. Where am I? So that hopefully gives a sense of both my own kind of experience with this, but also how I see that kind of, that's not just true for me, that's true for all of us to some extent or other, as far as I've seen. And I'll just share something again about that, like innate desire, stroke, need to be seen. This might seem really inappropriate, but I'm just going to share it because it popped into my head this morning as I was putting on the sequins. I remembered when for my dad's funeral, which was in 2012, as a way before I started doing any of this kind of work, because really his death was the catalyst for my kind of journey into spirituality, personal growth, whatever word you want to give to it. So at the point of his funeral, I was definitely having what some might call some kind of awakening, but I was very much kind of as I had been. And I chose for his funeral to wear, the dress was fairly normal. It was just a kind of fitted navy lace dress, but I wore bright red high heel shoes with it. And just to add to this picture, I was one of the coffin bearers. I decided I really wanted the honor of being able to bear his coffin. And so it just struck me, all of that just felt really normal to me. It wasn't like I chose to wear bright red high heels to carry my father's coffin as a statement or as a kind of like way of getting attention on me at all. It was just popped into my mind this morning, like, wow, it really could have looked like that. And it really could have seemed like that was my intention. And it really wasn't. It just was a kind of very authentic expression of me. And I think that was really where I was coming from. It felt more honoring for me to be an authentic expression of me at his funeral, even though that's clearly quite it's almost like a film, isn't it? Now I think about it, kind of like a woman carrying her father's coffin, not on my own, obviously, with however many men it is. I was the only woman. So it was like various undertakers plus family, but all of the men, wearing these bright red shoes. So I just wanted to share that story because I think this shows what I'm talking about, that this is like a deep underlying drive. It isn't something that's kind of like not to say it never is, but like often it isn't a kind of consciously thought out strategy or way of getting attention. It's just something that's like very deeply authentic. way of expressing who we are. Okay, right. Let me just gather my thoughts. It's been a bit scattered with the blasted dogs and the television on in the other room and everything. Right. So my part of my vision for this year was to step into a greater level of expression, and specifically to start to do public speaking, talk on stage. And you may have heard me talk about this before, but that's always been a huge fear of mine. Less so in the kind of years since I've just, had this transformation, let's call it. But it's definitely still been very much an edge for me. This again talks to what I was saying, that halo effect of, for example, doing a Facebook Live, you think would be, or being able to run webinars or live trainings, you would think would transfer really nicely to be able to do public speaking. Not so much. It does a tiny bit, but not that much. And so I had this real pull to do more of those do them at all. I hadn't done any public speaking for many, many years. So I had this call to start doing that. But the fear was immense, absolutely immense. And it was so like the power of making a commitment like that. So it was part of my commitment this year. That was one of the things that I was committed to doing. And without actually putting that out there, like without speaking to anyone, by, I think it was the end of January, I had 2 talks lined up where they just kind of like come up. It wasn't that I had created them intentionally or in a kind of gone out there and got them. They just arrived, which I just thought like, wow, so funny how these things work. The synchronicity I see has just, and I think this is also something that's separately true. The more willing we are to be the gift that we are, the more that we seem to notice like that gets channeled, let's say, through this kind of synchronicity with the world. Anyway, so for me, it was a big edge to move through this fear of being in a situation where I was sharing myself, sharing my message, and it being in person for some reason. And I say for some reason, I've got some sense of that. In fact, if you go check out a coaching session, a live coaching session I did with Adam Quiney, who I mentioned earlier, I'll link to that in the comments too. I go in depth into a story about, and I've shared this on the podcast too, I'm sure. I go into a story of me reading a poem as a teenager to my class and really feeling a lot of shame and having done wrong in doing so. And I think that was a lot of what created that fear of being myself in a kind of public setting in that way. So, and in fact, that also doing that session with Adam was another edge in that it certainly wasn't to the same extent as what I'm talking about with the talks, but certainly being coached live and by a friend and sharing, really vulnerable experiences. I think I cried at least once on that show, another example. And yet there's something just so rich and so rewarding for all of us when we're willing to do that. I'll talk about more of that probably in a minute, but that's really present to that. And the feedback I got afterwards, both publicly and people messaging me, really, really confirmed that to me. Like when we're willing to be seen, really that is willing to be vulnerable, to be seen for who we really are. It's a gift to all of us. Anyway, moving on back to the talk. So I did a talk for a local group. So it wasn't a kind of like standing on stage talking to the masses, but in some ways it was edgier for me because it was a really lovely group of people, but I hadn't met them before, sitting around, I think there was about 16 of us, I think, sitting around a long table. So it felt kind of odd because it required all the things in terms of, having presence, being able to go through a coherent talk, hold their attention, all that kind of stuff, that it would have had I been speaking from a stage. And yet it felt even more edgy because it's kind of like, who the hell am I? I'm just sitting here at a table along with all of them. Like that definitely actually made it edgier for me than I think it would have been had it been on the stage. Anyway, I'm going to talk through, because I think this is a great example of what shows up for us when we have that sense of it's ready, time for me to be seen, and I've got all this fear showing up. What the hell shall I do with that? So I noticed that, the fear was present right from the point where I agreed to do it. It wasn't a kind of like, it only showed up on the day or a couple of days before. Like from the moment I agreed to do the talk, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is the thing I've been asking for. And oh my gosh, I feel a lot of fear about it. And the thing that I think really helped right from the get-go, from like that moment, which probably about maybe a month before, I think I agreed to do it maybe a month before I actually did it. And in the past, going right back to my kind of when I was working in corporates, occasionally then I would need to, like, I would never volunteer, just to be clear. Occasionally I would have to get like literally onto a stage to give a talk about something. And I would spend like the weeks beforehand just killing myself over it, like imagining like the worst case scenarios, and just would spend weeks beforehand, like the nerves just building with this like sense of like dread hanging over me like a dark cloud. Like I really remembered it was such a visceral experience that it'd been lodged in my memory that I could recall that feeling so easily. And I remember when going back to a month before this talk that I'd agreed to do, thinking, okay, so that's one way I could experience this. I'll get through it, because I always did get through it. But is there something else available to me here? And the way I approached it was very similar to how we collectively, Jonathan and I, talk about creation with our work, in that it's the role of having a vision, it can't be underestimated. When we have that sense of like, this is where I'm going. In fact, I talked to Dominic Scafidi about this on, was it last week's show? I think it was last week's show. When we have that sense of like, this is what I want, and have that as a guiding light, we have somewhere to move towards, we have somewhere to focus on. And so that was really clear to me. Like, this is an opportunity. I am like, that's one of my superpowers. I'm really, really good at visualizing and focusing. So it was very clear to me, like, this is a place for me to really be clear on my wanted, my vision state. And not to say I then dismiss anything that comes up as a fear of what I don't want, but I now have two places I can focus. And the more at choice I can be, which is, I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, the more choice I can be, the more choice I have, the more I can actually sort of say, okay, that exists, the unwanted state exists. That's me, for example, getting a really kind of trembly voice when I'm doing the talk, kind of having that sense of, just sweating and feeling like hot and bothered, stumbling my words, them thinking I'm just talking complete nonsense. Like, all of that was a very like, there was a very clear unwanted state there. And so it wasn't denying that existed. Like, that was there for sure. It can exist, and I can have my feelings about it, and I can keep choosing back into, and where I'm focusing is this vision of me being able to show up from an open heart, from this message that I believe in so deeply, really want to share with the world. The actual message itself, ironically, was quite, maybe not ironically, given it's what I do, but it really was about us kind of allowing ourselves to be our unique gift, be our unique magic. So it was just like, if I can be that, if I can allow myself to be my unique gift, we will all be better off for that, because that's just how it works. And so I had a very clear vision that was that wanted state, what I wanted to create from the talk. So that is something I so wish I had the clarity on going back all those years when I used to have a very different experience of the weeks before a talk. And I believe was probably about a good 95% of what created the difference for me. I really do. So if you're someone who wants to be seen more deeply in any kind of format medium, that's something I would really recommend. Like, if you take one thing from this, take that, get clear on what is it you actually want. Like, you are going to use your amazing, beautiful, creative mind to imagine all the things you don't want, for sure. You're going to imagine people judging you, people thinking you shouldn't have a voice, people thinking you're talking rubbish, people, have I said that twice? I don't know. People thinking that you're being like money grabbing and you shouldn't be talking about whatever you're talking about in this time. You're going to have no problem dreaming up all the things you don't want. Just use a little bit of that creative energy, and hopefully quite a lot of that creative energy, to think about what you do want. What is the point of this? What is that vision? And we probably don't have time to really do justice to this, but really, this is quite helpful. Elizabeth Lovius and I were talking about it on this week's podcast, so that would be a good one to listen to too. We're talking about how when we have that deep sense of who we are, our vision comes from our being. When we know who we are, we have a sense of kind of like, well, from that place of understanding who I am, my vision is kind of like a natural expression, let's say, of who we are. Oh my goodness, I've now got the children arguing in the background behind me. This is just like, seriously, like the amount of time I've said that quote of never work with children and animals over the last couple of weeks. And now I've got the dogs trying to come back in the room, and I'm going to have to open the door because they'll just keep doing it. Guys, do you remember the bit where I started recording the video? Oh my goodness, this could not be more disastrous. Okay, I've no idea even where I was now. Like, give me a moment. Let me just get myself focused. Right, okay, so I spoke about vision. How are we doing for time? I don't know how long I've been on. 44 minutes, okay. So one more thing I want to share on this, and this is something, again, I could just go so deep on, but I think even just touching on it is helpful. The other thing, in fact, I just said that thing I said about the vision made 95% of the difference. It's hard because it did make a huge difference. And the other thing I'm about to say is also huge as well. So ignore my numbers. I don't even know. They all work together. So the other aspect of this is us. You could call it embodiment. You could call it us allowing ourselves to like fully inhabit this soft animal of our body. But for me, having, the work over the last few years I've done personally, and I now also do with clients, has been very much about really allowing myself to attune to the world through my body, to resensitize, to approach the world through what can be experienced more deeply and really only through the body, rather than doing it all through this kind of, and often we are very trained to do this in our culture, instead of doing it all from the mind. And when I say from the mind, even that's weird, because more and more I see that there is no separation. It isn't mind and body, but our awareness can be very much on those kind of thought processes rather than that embodied experience. So bringing that to whatever it might be, any type of creation, but specifically when it's something that's driving up a lot of fear, like being seen, we're going to really notice that show up in a physical way. We're going to have all the usual kind of like adrenaline, the fight or flight response happening at various points. Like it's not going to be going on fully for the whole month beforehand, but certainly before the talk itself or before the post itself or before the live itself, whatever it is you're trying to do. And having now such a deep sense of more than familiarity. It's hard to it's always hard to talk about this stuff because it's kind of paradoxical, because where else can we be apart from our body? And yet we also know our awareness can be everywhere. But so when I say familiarity with being in my body, it sounds odd, but hopefully you have some sense of what I mean. So the more inhabiting my senses, inhabiting my skin, inhabiting the places that I feel tension and numbness, working through those, the more that experience that my body gives me doesn't scare me. It just feels like home, no matter what I'm experiencing. And it's not to say I love the feeling of fear in my body. Honestly, I don't. Probably there's very few people that say they would choose to have that experience more than anything else. But it much more now feels like just part of all the things, all of the rich, gorgeous, enlivening experiences I can have through the medium of this body. And so that on its own has been huge for me to recognize, like, oh, look, that's what I'm feeling right now. And then this is what I'm feeling right now. And this is what it's showing me. And this is what I'm learning about myself through this experience. And also realizing the narratives I can give to that, which, I mean, there's nothing really that you can say is true, but to, I think, even approach those stories we have about certain sensations can be really helpful. One example, this is going to be quite a shallow example, but I'm hoping it gives you a sense of like the possibility here. I've been reading the book Presence by Amy Cuddy. She of the fabulous TED Talk about kind of how, I can't remember the name of it. It's something like how body language shapes confidence or something like that. I'll try and remember to link to that too. And in the book, she talked about something around the difference between if you're preparing for something, an important interview, talk, something like that, the difference between naming that experience that comes up physically as being nervous versus excitement. And on the morning of the talk particularly, I really noticed that experience of nerves coming up. And then kind of more as an inquiry, like, what if that is excitement? What's the difference? Like, can I notice the difference of like nervousness and excitement? And like, they've actually got a very similar feeling in the body. And so that's just an example. But honestly, we can inquire and meet our experience in that kind of curious, open-hearted way, no matter what it is. There's always going to be something in that for us. So that for me, again, was a game changer, to be able to experience this experience so fully, so deeply. I feel like it took me from just getting through the talk to getting through the talk in a way that I was actually really pleased with. And the feedback I got was beautiful. My experience of it was beautiful. I really don't think I could have wanted it for it to have gone better or differently. To this sense of, that was a wonderful thing. But do you know what? Even more than that was this just like, wow, this is living. This is really experiencing life fully. That was my overriding take from the whole thing. It was just like, yes, I gave myself that gift of being fully in life, fully embodied, which to me are the same thing. Okay. I'm almost out of time, and I think I've covered everything roughly I wanted to cover, despite all the craziness that's been going on here. Just one final thing on the body. This is a really simple thing, which blew me away when I first realised it. It might be because I'm a bit simple, I don't know. But I remember a few years ago reading somewhere or other when someone was talking about presence and being embodied, and they said something like, the body can only ever be now. The body can only ever be in the present, which is so obvious And yet for me, it had this profound effect of like, oh, of course, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about presence, we talk about being in the now. And the moment we're placing our awareness on our body, whether that be our breath. I mean, the breath can be a gorgeous way of like really bringing our awareness in and deep and into our body, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be being aware of how our body feels and where we're feeling tension and where we're feeling pleasure. But as soon as we do that, we're here in the moment, we're here in the present. And that's also been something really powerful for me over the years and again, it's so obvious. It's one of those things, it's just like, surely I knew that already, but yeah, it wasn't there in my awareness. But just knowing that like our body is always home. As soon as we choose back into being in our body, we're here safe in the present moment. We're not out there in the future worrying about it. We're not back in the past, I don't know, regretting it or kind of feeling the pain of whatever happened. Like we're here in the moment, experiencing these beautiful bodies. Okay, I'm going to end with a quote, which I could have been better prepared about. Oh, Carl's just said the broadcast keeps interrupting. I'm sorry about that. My broadband has been horrendous. I'm hoping it's kind of going to be okay for the audio on the podcast, fingers crossed. So if you've missed a lot on this, catch up with the podcast afterwards. I'm hoping the audio will be fine on there. Let me just find this quote that I could have prepared earlier and didn't. Here we go. So this is a quote from the Charles Eisenstein article that I mentioned earlier that we'll link to. Already we can feel the power of who we might become. A true sovereign does not run in fear from life or from death. A true sovereign does not dominate and conquer. That is a shadow archetype tyrant. The true sovereign serves the people, serves life, and respects the sovereignty of all people. The coronation marks the emergence of the unconscious into consciousness, the crystallization of chaos into order, the transcendence of compulsion into choice. And I wanted to leave with that quote, partly just because it's amazing, and also because that has become almost like a mantra for me over the week or so since I read the article, where this is the opportunity for us in this time to really use this as a coronation, to really use this as a gift to see more about who we are, bring, as he talks about there, the unconscious into consciousness, to take from what's in shadow into the light. And specifically, when we're talking about allowing ourselves to be seen, we can be very compelled by fear. Like when we're talking about compulsion, mostly it's driven by fear. So we can be compelled by fear not to allow ourselves to be seen, to hold back from expressing ourselves, to do it in a more diluted way. And what this is an opportunity to do is to allow ourselves to be at choice. That in itself is a sovereign act, to be at choice and allow ourselves to understand the fears there, not dismiss it, not bypass it, understand the fears there, but not be compelled by it, to make a choice, to allow ourselves to be seen as the deep gift that we are. So now I think I'm done. And what do I need to tell you about? So much. So if you were feeling the call back into your body, as I was talking about, that whole thing around the gift of being embodied. I'm afraid I only have this for women at the moment. We may do something like this for men in the future, but for the moment it is for women only. And it's called Unraveling the Body, and it's our brand new course starting in May. And it's all about unraveling the body, understanding its gifts and the place you're kind of held in bonds, and understanding its mysteries. It is going to be gorgeous. And that's at primalhappiness.co/unravel. If you're listening to this live and you want more of this kind of thing, go check out the podcast. That's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. And do go join our Facebook group as well. You'll get to, oh my goodness, I think my I think my broadcast is just terrible. So if you can hear me at all, I hope you can. I don't know if you can now at this point. Go join our group at facebook.com/group/primal happiness. Is there anything else? Oh, yes, of course. I'll be sharing more about this in this week's podcast with Elizabeth Lovius, but I have got something really exciting coming up for leaders in particular. It's called Adaptive Leadership. It's all about how to be a heart-led leader who is able to adapt and grow with these times. I'll add I can't remember the webinar link off the top of my head, but I'll make sure that's in the comments too. We're doing a free webinar next Thursday, I think it's the 9th. Free webinar all about that topic, about adaptive leadership. So that's all for now. Lots of love. Have a fabulous weekend. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Mwah. Bye-bye. So we're done for this month. Are you going to choose into moving through fear and allow yourself to be seen? If so, firstly, try out the practices that I talked about. And so 2 of those were placing your awareness on your body, and that could be via breath or another means. And that immediately brings us home and into the present moment. And secondly, be open-hearted and curious about your embodied experience, particularly your emotions. What do you feel? Can you meet and allow yourself to feel that fully? Does the experience of, say, nervousness have to be a negative thing? Could it mean something else? Could it even be something else? And if you'd like to share what you're noticing come up, you can head on over to the Primal Happiness Facebook group and post there. And the link for that is facebook.com/group/primal happiness. I'd also love to know if you've got any feedback, questions, topic suggestions, anything else. And the group is the best place to post those there too. And if you'd like to join me live next show, you'd be very welcome. Head on over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/primal happiness, and you can watch out for the show airing live on the first Friday of every month at 10 a.m, either BST or GMT, depending on time of year. Right now it's BST. If you'd like to get notes and links, which there are a ton of links for this show, actually, I've tried to collate everything I talked about and put them into the show notes. And so if you want those, go to the show notes at primalhappiness.co/episode 277. If you're feeling the call to the brand new Sacred Leadership Circle, co-led by Elizabeth Lovius and I, go register your interest and you'll be the first to know when it opens up for enrollment soon. That's at leadershipwisdom.info/circle. Incredibly excited about that one. And women, if you are feeling your body calling from an unraveling in a really beautiful and safe way, go and check out all the juicy details, and they're at primalhappiness.co/unravel. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device as soon as it's been released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.